In this day and age of easy and accessible video games like Sekiro, Dwarf Fortress, or the bizarre adventures of Woodruff and the Schnibble, truly only one game stands out. A video game that turns boys into men and men into rats. And just like Mount Tygetus for the Spartans, gamers have escaped from Tarkov, baby. But if you haven't heard of Tarkov, don't worry about it. BSG, the developers, actually provided a pretty good summary of the game on their website. Escape from Tarkov is a hardcore and realistic online first-person action RPG/simulator with MMO features and a story-driven walkthrough.
You serious?
Brilliant!
EFT is an insanely addictive and immersive game that can create some truly amazing risk-reward situations while offering a gameplay loop that no other game on the market can currently replicate. And it's also a game that I would unironically not recommend unless you hate yourself. I know to some of you this might seem like a funny haha video essay kinda thingy, but this is actually therapy for me, to treat my PTSD, my post-Tarkov stress disorder. And in this video I'm not just gonna sit here and yell cheaters bad or please Nikita nerf Chads. I'll be looking deeper into core elements of the game and explain why many days I find myself thinking that I'm more in love with the concept of what Tarkov wants to be rather than what Tarkov actually is. This should go without saying, but the game is still in beta testing, so every criticism I have is of 12.11. A lot of the game might change, and to all those troglodytes who are like, well, why are you criticizing an unfinished game? Look up why beta testing is a thing, but also because I'm a cynical asshole. So let's start off with the EFT community's favorite buzzword, realism. Not only Tarkov, but gaming in general has been plagued with this idea that realism equals fun and immersive, which most of the time it's not the case. BSG, however, for the most part, has managed to nail down gamifying realism. Gun modding, healing, looting, simulating retail workers' pain and suffering. None of these things are one-to-one with real life, but they feel just close enough to where you don't lose immersion and makes you ask yourself whether a stapler and a pill of ibuprofen is enough to treat gunshot wounds. But even if you nail down realism with one aspect of the game, it ends up being a double-edged sword if you don't stay consistent with it through all the different mechanics, because it makes it super easy to cherry-pick what is and what isn't realistic, which can result in an inconsistent experience for the player. Which is why, in its current state, Tarkov feels like a game with split personality disorder. On one hand, it's selling itself and wants to be this hyper-realistic tactical milsim, while on the other, it's basically Call of Duty with clunkier movements. Which brings us to the next point, movement. Considering how deep and complex a lot of the Tarkov features are, it's surprising to see such a shallow and arcadey movement system. And I know, inertia is coming, soon TM, but as of right now we don't really know how or to which extent that is going to be implemented. Hopefully, it will prevent the constant AD spam that goes on during gunfights. The lack of inertia is truly the #1 problem with Tarkov's movement. Just so we are clear, inertia is an object's resistance to a change in its velocity. If you let your nuts hang, their position will not change until I kick them. Tarkov has this super jittery movement where other players feel like they have no weight, but more importantly, they lack any sort of transitioning animations, making movement incredibly unpredictable and also comical to look at. What's even worse is that the lack of inertia combined with the ever-prominent desync issues makes other movement mechanics completely obsolete, and it bleeds through other problems with the game, of which we're gonna talk about in a minute. But even outside the fact that Mario 64 has inertia and Tarkov doesn't, I feel like there isn't enough focus on advanced movement mechanics, because sure, you can crouch, lean, jump, go prone, you're able to change your crouching height or change your movement speed, and that's about it. You can also sidestep, but why use that when you can just exploit the desync and AD around corners, and you can also blind fire, which I don't think anyone has ever used seriously. Tarkov has a weight system and it gives you movement penalties depending on how much your PMC is carrying. I would argue the penalties are not harsh enough, especially when it comes to sprinting, strafing and jumping. Jumping in Tarkov especially feels super arcadey. Part of it is probably because there is no vaulting and the game still needs to give you a way to get over obstacles, but this can create some truly silly ways you can surprise other players, like catwalking on a rail and jumping over a windowsill with complete disregard that your PMC is carrying 30 kilos of equipment. But enough about movement. At the end of the day, this is a shooter, not a mover. I'm talking PvP, I'm talking gunplay, I'm talking pure, unfiltered testosterone, whatever that means. So how does PvP work in Tarkov? Head eyes. When you first start playing Tarkov, you are tricked by the game and the promotional footage into thinking that this is a gritty, tactical shooter, so you should move around slowly, assess your surroundings, and pick your shots carefully. But you'll quickly realize that most times that doesn't work. Watching good players play Tarkov is genuinely depressing, not only because I wish I was as good as them, but also because I was sold on this idea that this was supposed to be a realistic milsim, yet you see them running around bunny hopping and hip firing like it's a Modern Warfare 2 lobby on cocaine. And in any other game, I wouldn't have a problem with this. I love fast-paced shooters, but I doubt that BSG set out to make the spiritual successor to Titanfall. Protect the comrade. Tarkov is an incredibly unforgiving game where engagements can end in milliseconds and you can lose so much progress in just one raid. So it's kinda infuriating when so many PvP elements are counterintuitive to what the game is attempting to go for. Hip firing is actually super accurate. Don't hold corners because Peeker's advantage is insane. Just nade every room because grenades are easier to come by than sex offenders on Discord. My next point is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that heavily influences the meta and the gunplay of Tarkov, which is that there are too many variables. You got flash damage, penetration value, armor points, armor class, fragmentation chance, chance to cause light bleed, chance to cause heavy bleed, chance to cause fracture, and they say there's a ricochet chance to helmets, but I'm pretty sure they're just trolling. And who knows what else is coded into the game. As I said, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but having too many variables, combined with the fact that the game is very cryptic about a lot of this information, and that most equipment in the game is very easy to come by, it creates this ecosystem in which any armor that is under class 5 is basically useless, and you've got this arsenal of beautifully modeled guns, all these attachments and ammo types that you can use, and almost none of it matters, because to go toe-to-toe against other players after the first 2 weeks of a wipe, it's ARs and like 5 different types of ammo. And I understand multiplayer games will always have something that is the meta, and in Tarkov's defense, it's one of the very few games where you can take a Makarov or a TOS shotgun and still manage to kill other PMCs. But realistically, how often is the average player gonna pull that off? My problem with Tarkov's meta is that the gap is just way too wide. Despite what I just said about having too many variables, I don't necessarily mind the RNG that is in the game. That's mainly because I don't consider Tarkov to be a competitive shooter. There are simply too many things that can affect whether you survive any given raid, and I'm completely fine with it. It creates a lot of different types of encounters and it makes the game more exciting. But I will die on this hill. Gun jamming has no place in EFT or most PvP shooters for that matter. There is nothing worse than a game can do than take agency away from the player, and that is all that gun jamming does. Because I have no problem with dying to someone that outplays me, but when the game decides through RNG alone that I need to die, it just makes me want to stop playing. Ironically, PvP encounters in Tarkov are extremely fast, and most times they just boil down to who can aim to the other's head faster. It's very rare to have drawn out firefights, so with gun jamming, by the time you realize your pew pew is not pewing anymore, you're basically dead. And I'm not even a Chad, I die most raids without it anyway. And now I wanna bitch about sound design. In a game where identifying a threat can be the difference between getting that ruble or breaking a keyboard, you need to provide players with accurate audio cues as to what is happening in their surroundings. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that Escape from Tarkov has some of the worst sound implementation of any multiplayer FPS I've ever played. Sound is so unreliable it might as well not be there. For starters, vertical audio is non-existent, and you will learn about this the hard way. Sound will also constantly break. The amount of times you'll just be walking around and you hear gunshots as if they are right next to you, only to realize someone is fighting a scav across the map. If you're indoors, all outside noises can be incredibly faint, yet from the outside in, you hear every little footsie tiptoeing around, trying not to be heard, alas, in vain. I'm like 93% sure that if you sprint on the escalators on interchange, other players will only start to hear the noise once you're halfway through it, depending on which floor they're on. And in general, I find that other players' footsteps are incredibly misleading and don't really give an accurate indication as to how far that person actually is. When it comes to the sound design itself, it feels like it was made by two different teams. On one hand, guns and explosives will give you never-ending eargasms. All the guns sound so punchy, so satisfying, and the sound of gunshots actually changes depending whether you're indoors or outdoors or if the place has echo. All the little sound effects of changing mags, of changing the firing rate, give it a little bit extra sauce. Side note, the game also has a pretty killer soundtrack, which it has no right to have considering you only hear it in menus and loading screens. But on the other hand, you have clong 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 clong. Am I the only one that hates most environmental noises in Tarkov? Like, rain is actually pretty pleasant, but I can't stand any of the footstep sound effects, and don't get me started on the wind. Like, I understand they need to sell in-game headsets, but Norvinsk got to be the most windy region in Russia, because it's just constant. Lastly, I want to talk about the progression and the flow of the game. I've never seen a game that hates new players as much as Tarkov does. And I don't care about your BS, oh, this game is supposed to be hardcore, so we need to make everything a little extra annoying just to spice it up. Tarkov desperately needs a better way to introduce new players to at least the main systems of the game. I'm not talking about treating them like forks-wielding children near electrical outlets, but the amount of hours you need to invest of the game just so you can learn how to play it is a bit ridiculous. I feel like not enough people mention that one of the most fun aspects of Tarkov is the discovery. Trying out new guns, finding rare items, exploring these large beautiful maps. It's fun when games don't hold your hand and let you explore at your own pace, but it's really frustrating when they hide crucial information for no reason, like not having an in-game map, which doesn't make sense on multiple levels, but mainly because this only works in a vacuum. I don't know if BSG has heard of this, but there's this thing called the internet where you can find a lot more than just porn and memes. I venture to guess that the vast majority of players did not learn the maps by just trial and error and trying to figure out what the hell is ZB-014, but they actually had the maps open while going, there's some trees and rocks around me, so I'm probably somewhere around here. And this idea of hiding crucial information doesn't only affect things like maps or which ammo is worth keeping, but also quests. Like, if you want to complete quests in Tarkov, the EFT wiki needs to become your new Bible. It isn't bad enough that the quests in Tarkov are essentially glorified achievements that lock your progression, but they're also incredibly vague, but with super specific solutions. In general, Tarkov just loves wasting your time. I can understand that loading into a map can take up to 6 minutes, but it's still kind of frustrating because some of the spawns are terrible and you can die in 30 seconds, kicking you back to the main menu, and oh, I've gotta heal up and get new equipment ready and fidget around in my tiny stash trying to remember in which tactical rig I put the Cobra Sight eye cup and get this ammo and these meds, and before you know it you spent 15 minutes doing nothing but looking at your inventory and then loading into a map where again you could die in 30 seconds. And don't get me started on the crafting system. In Tarkov you have a hideout which you can upgrade, and each upgrade will give you benefits like being able to build certain items. And it's actually quite satisfying to work towards your hideout, but the god-awful UI and some crafts taking up to 3 real-life days to be completed make it seem like the most predatory mobile game ever. Speaking of predatory tactics, there are different versions of Tarkov that you can buy. You've got your Standard Edition, your Edge of Darkness Edition, and all the others that nobody cares about. The only difference between all these editions is that the game is designed around the Edge of Darkness Edition, the most expensive one. AAA devs have been using this sneaky tactic for years. Create a problem, sell you the solution. It is unacceptable when EA or Ubisoft does it, so I don't understand why BSG should be the exception all of a sudden. I don't know how anyone can defend this practice. Like, this is as close as you get to pay to win without technically being pay to win. I know most will disagree with me on this, but I would take overpriced skins over this, and it has nothing to do with the fact that I really want to see a shovel AK in Tarkov. I could really talk about Tarkov for hours, and so far I didn't even mention the MMO skills, the scav karma, traders, the flea market, loot spawns, extracts, insurance, events, bosses, cheaters, the awful lighting, and I didn't really go in depth about the desync problem, despite being one of the most prominent issues, and this really just goes to show how big and ambitious of a project Tarkov actually is. I honestly think with time, BSG will improve on the game. They seem to have pure intentions and they are clearly passionate about it, and they stayed dedicated despite having one of the most toxic communities out there. Like, seriously, some of you need to chill. But at the same time, I can't repress my cynicism and think that a lot of features, a lot of promised features will actually never be delivered, and that EFT will never be as good as it could be. Partially because I feel like BSG is biting off more than they can chew, but also because with certain changes, it doesn't really seem like they have a clear vision of what they want, or maybe the vision has changed since the game has blown up in popularity, and now they're afraid to alienate sections of their player base. Another worrying sign is that they seem way more focused on adding more stuff to the game instead of fixing core issues, which I understand why they're doing it, and I bet there's different parts of the team working on different aspects of the game, but if your foundation is bad, you can only build so many floors before you inevitably end up in a live leak video. What I said in my intro that I would unironically not recommend Tarkov wasn't entirely a joke, because while I never played anything that is able to give me such insane adrenaline rushes as Tarkov, those moments are too few and far between, and it requires such a time investment that is automatically gonna scare off most casuals away. But even if you're willing to put in the time and learn all the ins and outs, once you're through that, all you're left with is frustration. By which I mean see you next wipe.